entirely using your ability to jump from object to object, trying to get to where you need to be, and it requires a lot of creativity. A good example of how this works in practice is that if you're controlling a robot that needs to get through a door, you don't just open the door. Your consciousness hops out of the robot, takes over the door, you open yourself, and then you hop back into the robot and press on because a door can't walk through itself. The main reason you're going to be jumping around to as many objects as possible is ego. Ego is the embodiment of consciousness and also your primary currency, which is a little on the nose there. You gain ego either by picking it up around the station or hopping into an object that can't resist your influence. You expend ego to use it to take over things that can resist you, such as enemy robots or security terminals, or you expend it to buy some juice at the vending machine. Juice is very important early on because you don't have a way of getting it yourself unless you find pickups, and pickups are rather sparse. Juice powers all of your abilities, from your ability to jump and fly to your shotgun, cloaking device, and pretty much everything else you get. While we're on the subject of scarcity, ego can be hard to come by, and a lot of thought goes into what exactly you're going to take over and how you're going to get past a room. You could try taking over a security camera to either disable them from seeing you so that you can slip past the patrolling robots, or forget about going back to your bug body entirely and just hop from camera to camera all the way to the door and find something else to take over on the other side of the room. You can always just print a new bug when you need one later on. Need to turn a lot of robots into a lot of scrap parts? Well, you could just go in there with your shotgun and start blasting, but that's going to take most, if not all, of your juice, making all your other items effectively, useless. I'll admit that normally I'm not too hot on a universal ammo system like here in Ctrl-Alt-Ego, but Mindfunk does a good job of contextualizing it in the world, and it makes sense from both a story and gameplay perspective. Alternatively, you could use some of your ego to take over one of the robots and use it to destroy all the others. An especially neat bit about having no true body is that every individual entity you can take over has its own health and juice pool, meaning that if you want to take over a dad robot and use it to disintegrate the other robots in a room, that's the dad's power and juice you're wasting, not your main bugs. That last bit is especially important because when something you're controlling has low power, it moves slower and it's harder to get away from threats when you're in that body. So using other people's power and juice is a very good way to make sure you have longevity in a level. But ego is only half the equation, if even that. Just like any good immersive sim, you've got a whole bunch of extremely exploitable tools and tricks at your disposal to make it through the space station and beyond. You've got the basic abilities such as flying around in a good old-fashioned shotgun, a shield generator that works by sapping power from other things around you instead of yourself, a teleport ability that lets you not just teleport but also appear in a different form at your destination, the ability to move heavy stuff with a tractor beam, a combat vacuum, and more. The best part about the variety of tools and abilities that is, aside from your hover ability, which is part of the tutorial in installing new programs, which is what Ctrl-Alt-Ego calls its abilities, you have access to everything as soon as you're able to install new abilities, and there is no wrong answer as to what build you start with. Every ability has a means to get you through the entire game and can be built up, used, and exploited to make it through the whole game quite easily. Want to sneak through everything with some visibility? Totally doable. Want to dump all your worms into the shotgun and just mulch everything in sight?
I don't want to do any of that. That looks not much fun.
To go about these puzzles and the main story tasks in the game. It's a marvel of design that every last room is done in such a way that there is essentially no wrong answer. And I don't mean that in a this is super easy type way. In fact, I had to take a few breaks during my playthrough because the little hamster in my head got tuckered out on its wheel, so I called it a day. It's more of a every challenge in Ctrl-Alt-Ego is so complex that there are answers that the devs couldn't even think of or could have possibly think of, and all of it's valid. Here's an example that I'm not going to give too much context on since it's in the late game, but I'll summarize it as, you need to get into this room, but the door isn't working properly. Now, you could hover to just the right spot to get a line of sight for teleportation and slip inside that way, exploiting that you can go anywhere that you have a clear path to, even if that path is about an inch wide. It's going to be a big problem getting out of that room later on by this same method, but that's cool. You can just ego hop out of the room through the walls to the bug printer at the beginning of the level and just reprint your body at the start of the area once you've gotten all the goodies. But what if you don't have the teleport ability? Well, there's a dad in the area, and you can use your tractor beam to pick it up and move it over to where it's close enough to the door that it has a line of sight through the crack. Ego hop into the dad and intentionally serialize your bug and then regenerate it inside of the office. And if either of those tricks don't work well, there's always, the intended method of figuring out how to get the door working again. This is essentially the game. You are given a certain task that you must do, and essentially anything is fair game to complete it. Sure, you could just go about the basics and shotgun your way through the game, which I'll admit I did for certain parts early on as I was learning the rules, but then again, later on when you can combine the shotgun with other abilities for some crazy cheese strats, it becomes a fun way to go about things when, if you have a really huge hammer, it doesn't matter if anything is a nail or not. Just about anything you're given can be used in concert with anything else to get the job done, and all the little puzzles you find around the game act like little sparks of ideas to get your imagination going to make the most cheese-tastic things possible. Since there are essentially as many ways to cheese and control ego as there are possible ability combinations, times every last room or other area in the game, times all the ways you can ego hop into other entities, I'm just going to tell you a few of my favorites that I've done or tried to do so that you can get a feel for all the stuff you're capable of doing. Let's start with something that's not too far off the beaten path. If anything, this is entirely intended. Combat vacuuming. One of the abilities you can get which would benefit you for having early on is the vacuum. It's literally a vacuum attachment for your bug's arm that lets you suck up little bits of destroyed enemies and recycle them into extra battery power and juice. It's not particularly good when you first get it, but especially early on in the game, every last little scrap of power and juice you can salvage is...
We get it. Very good.
CVY